It's 7 o'clock on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. A very good evening to South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, our digital audience with us tonight. So good to see them, good to have them on the program. Looking forward to getting their questions for our guests in a short while. Sport broadcast rights. If you didn't care about it before, you do now, especially if you rely on the public broadcaster, as do millions, right? The SABC concluded an agreement with MultiChoice to broadcast Springbok matches. Questions? And to borrow from a few scrum engagement calls, why is there need to crouch and pause with uncertainty, touching a nerve of the nation, and then finally a set of outcomes that is not everything you want, but it'll have to do? Sports' role in nation building and social cohesion can't be overstated enough. But that can only be achieved if we either watch or play it, right? We are talking about accessibility tonight, the ability to enjoy free-to-air and free-to-view access to national sporting events. How do you weigh up the commercial viability of broadcast rights with public interest needs? The current bidding process, is it fair? Is it open? Is it transparent? We will discuss, which leads us to our question of the week. And we're asking you, what do you make of the reoccurring tussle for sports broadcast rights in South Africa? And more importantly, how should it be resolved at It's Topical SABC? Let's walk and talk. With regards to in the public interest, it's a big thing, right? What qualifies to be in the public interest? What sort of criteria is used to determine this? Must it always involve a senior national team? What about individuals representing the country? Let us know at It's Topical SABC. Perspective coming up. All right. One will run out of superlatives to describe the Springboks' performance against the Romanians. They gave Romania a 76-0 hiding in their Group B Rugby World Cup game in Bordeaux, France. The performance met expectations as the Boks scored 11 tries, I understand, and a penalty. The Boks are now second in Pool B, with Ireland leading the way. The two sides will clash, big clash, on Saturday. All right, I want to get you context, and as always, I want to turn to the magic wall, what we know and why it matters. My guest tonight, and I'll invite her, Janet Witten, is SABC News Specialist Sports Researcher. Good to have you on the program, Janet. We need your better mind to understand. Sometimes it can get complex. Let's talk about the state of play. What is it with regards to the broadcasting rights? Why is it such a tussle?
Because essentially at the moment, SuperSport have what some would argue is a monopoly over sporting rights, and that is particularly true with regards to rugby. Rugby, more so than anything else, is completely dominated by SuperSport and the rights they have. They have an exclusivity agreement with SA Rugby, which allows them to broadcast all the matches, both international matches and also the various competitions that SA Rugby are involved in.
Okay.
That becomes complicated though, because it's not that simple. The exclusivity agreements they pay a premium for. That premium payment is very important to the federations. It allows the federations to develop their sport from a grassroots level as well as through to the national teams. So in the case of rugby, SuperSport is a big revenue earner for SA Rugby, and it allows them to do the kind of programs that they need to do. So it's a very complicated situation. We talk about commercial rights, but it's not just about the SABC and eMedia versus MultiChoice. It affects a lot more people than that, and more than just the public who want to watch. It's also about the kids that want to play.
Exactly. Talk to us and help the public understand the process of getting somebody soccer as something declared a sport of national interest. Who decides?
At the moment, that decision is supposedly made by ICASA, but it's a very flawed system. It's a regulation that was put in place in 2010. The broadcasting landscape in terms of digital and streaming has changed dramatically since 2010. We don't need to go into all of those details. It's fairly self-explanatory. You look at some of the various sports that are on your screen at the moment. Obviously, the big events like the Commonwealth Games or the Olympics, those are involved, and then international events like the Netball World Cup, which we've just seen in Cape Town, the Rugby World Cup, which we're talking about at the moment as well, and then also the Cricket World Cup, which is coming up in a month's time. Soccer is a little more complicated. There are less games involved, and the World Cup is complicated by the fact that we don't often play in it. So that doesn't, it's not the same kind of thing. It doesn't have the same kind of national interest. Even though it has a huge fan base, it doesn't have the same kind of national interest. There's a lot of money paid for these events.
Right. So lots of elements in terms of sport broadcast rights. What are some of the key considerations?
You have the SABC mandate, which is to broadcast sports of national interest. That list is a very kind of varying list. It changes from year to year. The original list that they're working off at the moment includes Super Rugby, for example. We don't play in Super Rugby anymore. So there's the All Africa Games, which is not as big an event as it used to be. So that's kind of, is that really a sport of national interest? We don't know. But the fact of the matter is, and what's indisputable here, is that it's an unfunded mandate. The SABC can't really necessarily afford to pay what is an extraordinary amount of money. Let's put the money in perspective. For example, a sporting event that doesn't include South Africa there, but has a huge following in South Africa, the English Premier League. SuperSport have an exclusive mandate for the satellite rights, and that is key. We'll get to that at the moment. For the satellite rights for the English Premier League to be shown on their channels. They pay £168 million for those rights. That is 168 million pounds. One of those.
There we go. That's extraordinary.
Which is extraordinary, and obviously, so we're talking about the rights to the Olympics cost 122 million. We're talking about money that very few companies can actually afford. So the SABC doesn't make bids initially for those kind of events because we don't have that kind of money. What the SABC, I think, would probably like more than anything else, you've got a guest later on who will be able to answer those kind of questions, is probably sub-licensing. So we don't show every event. For example, the English Premier League, we show an English Premier League match, a live match a week. We got those rights not from MultiChoice, but from another company that has the free-to-air rights for those matches. We obviously pay. In fact, we don't pay up front. We pay a percentage of advertising for those games, which is what makes it affordable for the SABC. It's there's wheels within wheels, and the satellite rights versus the free-to-air rights seems simple enough, but in this day and age of renewed technology, free-to-air doesn't necessarily mean we're not available on satellite as well, including, as everybody knows, on MultiChoice's own channels. So when we have free-to-air rights, it's still available via various streaming and pay TV channels, which makes it complicated.
You spoke about the wheels. How's the wheels turning overseas? So what's the international best practice?
The way it works in the UK is probably closest to what we're looking at now, and there's a new white paper that's up for discussion at the moment that looks at this. In the UK, it's governed by what's called the Ofcom Code of Sports, and they have a very specific list of sport that has to be shown free to air. Not all the tennis majors, for example, the Grand Slams, should I say, have to be shown, but Wimbledon does have to be shown free to air. That's one of the events that is shown on the BBC. The BBC has two free to air channels, 1 and 2. ITV is also free to air, and all of these events are split, and sometimes, for example, like the FA Cup, and are split split amongst the various channels, and that's a fairly common practice here, and it's something that has never happened in South Africa, and it's possibly something that ETV and the SABC can look at in the future, is actually sharing the rights, the free-to-air rights to something like the Olympics, so people can watch what they want to watch. Sky Sports is a bit like the UK's multi-choice. They have the rights to everything else.
Right.
They have the rights to all Formula One. None of those Formula One races are on the list. It's very much based on, and this is the key to it, the list is sports of national interest involving national teams and often events that take place within that country, except where confederations are involved. So you're looking at World Cups, Olympics, Commonwealth Games. Those all fall at. Otherwise, it's sports within those countries. And yeah, it's about money, but it's not just commercial viability. It's taking into consideration the fact that some of these sports, especially the smaller sports, are very dependent. Netball, for example, is very dependent on the money that they get from Supersport for the exclusive rights that they had.
And you did some interesting reading with regards to India. How does it operate?
India is very interesting because, I mean, socioeconomically, India is a developing country. They're more like us than obviously the UK or the US, where the money involved in sports rights is really silly money. In the US, for example, just to throw out now, you were throwing numbers there. NBC paid $7.7 billion US dollars for the Olympics over a 10, 12-year period. It's crazy. No, there's no space for the zeros there. But in India, most of the rights, particularly to cricket, which, as we all know, is by far the biggest sport in India, are on pay TV. There are various different pay TV channels that they're on. Star 18 is one of them. There are various different. There are various other ones, and if you have access to those pay TV channels, you can watch any cricket that's played anywhere in the world. The SA20, there's rights holders in India for the SA20, for example, but it's all on pay TV, and that's where the money for those sports comes from, and that's why India is such a dominant player on the ICC, because so much money comes from those sports rights that feeds through to the ICC and allows them to develop the game.
So much to discuss, so many elements to this. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Janet Whitten there is SABC News Specialist Sports Researcher. All right, let's get your take. As you know, our popular word on the street feature, we've asked you, what do you make of this off-the-pitch drama involving tussle for sporting rights in South Africa? This is what you had to say. Take a look.
Maybe the revenue base for the SABC should be revised in terms of where the rights, the money for buying those rights can be driven from. So for instance, the same thing that we do in other industries where we say there's a competition commission, that kind of thing probably needs to be looked at with the other players that are currently in the industry. If one, maybe, or two, three organizations are holding a fair share of the rights, maybe there is need to sort of revise the distribution of those rights.
But I also think it's a commercial issue. I think the SABC needs to be able to find the money to compete and buy the rights. And I think that's very important. It's very important for them to be able to compete.
SABC as the public broadcaster should be having those rights. You know, I know the last time they've missed out on the PSL rights, it went to Super Sports. You know, and I know South Africans, all South Africans, irrespective of color, creed, they do follow and love rugby. You know, and especially I think Siya Kolisi has been an example to a lot of young people from disadvantaged communities. So really they would love to, not everybody's got a DSTV, by the way. So I think SABC getting those rights, it's the right direction, and I'm really in for it. You know, it's a good thing.
I think it's important for the people to have access to like such a big event like the Rugby World Cup, because it's a topic, a big topic, public topic for them, and it's a unifying topic. So not everyone can afford to have like a private channel to pay. So it would be good that the public broadcaster is giving access to that.
So whoever has the money will get the rights. Whoever doesn't, unfortunately, they won't, because people need to get paid. Unfortunately, it is a business that I cannot shy away from, be it the SABC or whoever. All the rights, that's why it's called rights. Someone needs to buy them, you know, for the public to view. So if you don't have the money, it's going to be difficult.
I guess all the broadcasts are dictated by money and the bigger corporates who ever get the rights earlier. So if you get in there and you've got the money, then you buy the rights. And I guess that's what mainly happens in most phases of life, especially broadcast. So it's getting first and having the money to pay for it to get in first.
All right, thank you very much indeed for your comments. It helps. Why? Because it helps the strategy going forward. It informs the strategy. Thank you very much indeed for participating in our Word of the Street feature. Now, the news, as you know, always comes first here on SABC News. We have a close eye on the United Nations General Assembly. As you know, a number of heads of state are landing in New York. News just in, President Cyril Ramaphosa has arrived in New York, where he will join those other world leaders in this week for the annual high-level segments of the United Nations General Assembly. The 78th session is expected to take place from the 18th to the 26th of September this month. And the President will deliver the South African statement to the United Nations General Assembly. Stay tuned. As you know, the President was in KwaZulu-Natal yesterday. He left afterwards to go and attend this. Who's in attendance? Is the Ukrainian President? Will he attend? How will those dynamics play out in real time? We will discuss. Sharon Bryce-Peace is our correspondent in New York. We will try and bring him in a little later on to unpack that. Let's unpack the current topic now. Let's get straight into it. Sports rights is important. Given the Boxers' winning streak of late, doubly important, if that's a word. Let's talk to Ian Plaatjes, SABC COO. Good to have you, sir, on. As well, Collin Mashile, Chief Director, Broadcasting Policy at the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program. We also have our digital audience as well. They'll be throwing in some questions. They are interested in this topic as well. Okay, just to mention that we did reach out to a number of various stakeholders. We reached out to MultiChoice. They said that they have concluded the sub-licensing agreement and they have no further comment on this. We reached out to SuperSport saying that thanks for reaching out, but however, as per protocol, SuperSport does not publicly discuss the nature or acquisition of sporting rights. We've also reached out to the Department of Sport. The Minister has an engagement in Toyondo over the weekend, so Sunday didn't work for him. We also reached out to ICASA. They weren't available, but we shall endeavor to try. We will try to understand these issues. Ian, to you first. Stumbling blocks in terms of negotiating rights, what are they?
I think the biggest is for there to be effective negotiations, there needs to be a willing buyer, willing seller. Here you have a willing buyer, but you don't have a willing seller. You have somebody that wants to actually manipulate and keep it exclusively to themselves. If they are forced to on-sell, the terms that they put on the table is just uneconomical. It's not feasible, and in our opinion, we think that that's anti-competitive.
Collin, what sort of legal mechanisms are there, legislative mechanisms are there to manage a situation like this, where you kind of weighing up viability, commercial viability versus public interest?
Yeah, good evening to the viewers out there and the people online. So in terms of the law, we have section 60.1 of the ECA that says even if the subscription broadcasters are able to get exclusive rights to this premium content or sports, there are certain sports that have to be listed by ICASA that are supposed to be free to air. The Rugby World Cup is one of those.
Right.
And so is the Cricket World Cup and FIFA, all of those events. So the law says that ICASA will have to engage with the broadcasters, they will have to engage with the sports rights owners and other regulators. That will be the Competition Commission. So in terms of our draft white paper, we had engaged with the public and all interested stakeholders to say, we are of the view that we will want, from a policy perspective, to determine the list, like in most countries.
Who's we? Government?
Yes.
Yes.
As the both Department of Sports and Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. and we'll want ICASA to deal with dispute resolution mechanisms and the code, as Jeanette was saying. But the reason why we wanted to do that is that we had discovered that if you do not allow ICASA to deal with dispute resolution mechanism, you find a situation that we found in 2010 where the negotiations will go and the SABC will get the right 4 weeks before and they are unable to sell the advertising, because when they buy the rights at that high price, how they recoup the money is via advertising and other activities that will draw back the commercial revenue. So the SABC has been suffering from getting the rights late and not being able to do any advertising and sponsorship that will ensure that they recoup the money they invested.
So correct me if I'm wrong, currently ICASA, in consultation with the Ministry of Sport and Digital Technologies, then decides what is in the public interest in terms of national sports, correct?
This is the only part where we have after consultation, because the recognition is that Minister of Sports is responsible for sport. We are responsible for broadcasting as the Department of Communication. So it's after.
So the white paper now switches it around. You want to decide as government?
We did not wake up and say we want to decide. It's a general trend. This has to do with the public interest, and in all other jurisdictions, even if you check with the UK and everywhere else, the Ministry of Sports together with the Minister of Broadcasting will decide the list, and the regulator, as Jeanette was saying, they'll do that code that will deal with if they were to buy the rights, probably say 5% will need to go to developmental sports and other issues that they need to do. So we are reclaiming that right back so that the ICASA focuses on the regulatory matters.
And these are contained in the white paper for the audio and audiovisual media service and online content safety,
that we published on the 31st of July, and it's up for comment by the 9th of October. Because of this is one of the key critical areas. As Janet was saying, we also realized that there are new online players that are coming. So the reason why we have to make it a deliberate decision is because you are seeing an emergence of, let's say you have DAZN that will buy all the rights and is based elsewhere. So when they come here, they need to know that even if they were to consume all the rights and outbid, maybe they pay the subscription now, they must know that even if they buy the Rugby World Cup, they have to provide them to the free-to-air service.
Will the SABC be in support of some of those proposals in that white paper?
Most definitely. So we have given input into the previous. In fact, we've given our view on that as well, and we'll be making a submission in terms of that. The previous one that ICASA published in March, I think 2021, we made recommendations to that as well. It was ignored, but yes, we certainly will be making as well.
All right, let's take it to our digital audience and get their say with regards to how they feel about this in terms of commercial viability versus public interest. Let's hear from Sahil. Sahil, your take.
Hi, thanks for giving me the opportunity. I just think, we have to think at the end of the day of public interest as a priority. If it comes down to money, as you heard from word of the street, it's going to be the people with the most money are going to get the deals. If you look at the CAF Champions League, for example, at the moment, CAF had a deal in place with a huge broadcaster, beIN Sports, and that deal fell through. It was a 12-year deal. I think it was valued at something like $428 million, and that fell through. You then have that same kind of monopoly here locally with SuperSport, and there's no way that the SABC will be able to compete with the financial muscle that DSTV or SuperSport has. So there needs to be another way that this can be seen to, and like your guest mentioned, legislation has to come in and protect the fans at the end of the day.
Sahil, thank you very much indeed. Let's hear from Lincoln.
Yes, I agree. I think we have to also analyze the society that we're living in. I think in our case, it's a pyramid society. So when we check commercial viability, we should also look at that space, because at the moment, if you look at Rugby World Cup, where our reigning champions are defending, there is no hype in the country because there is no access. So our broadcaster doesn't really play an active part in this space. So commercial viability must also invite the government intervention, because the SABC, which represents the bottom part of the pyramid mainly, would be a player in space, so that we can be able to access our boys and be able to celebrate them as we did in the past. But now the hype is not there at all. And it's all access to the mid and the upper level of the pyramid, as it were. Commercially, buying the rights at an exchange rate that we have now is extremely expensive. It would not be viable for SABC. And remember, SABC is not able to enforce TV licensing and revenue options. So that is my submission to that effect.
Lincoln, thank you very much indeed. Ian, just if you can maybe elaborate on the SABC's recommendations of unbundling sports rights. What are some of the issues on the table?
So we believe that, and we don't want to see us competing with MultiChoice. There's a need for a paid TV service in South Africa, and there's a need for a public broadcaster service in South Africa as well. We need to find a model that works for both parties. So if you unbundle the rights, that means we can acquire the free-to-air rights. Somebody else that doesn't have a free-to-air service cannot acquire that and manipulate that, either withholding it from us or putting restrictive conditions to that. So that's our contention on that. However, we can't wait for the regulator to come in force with this. We've got the Cricket World Cup coming up in a month's time. We need to gear around the sponsors. The sponsors need to then come up and say to the rights owners, no, we are not going to be sponsoring you if you don't pass on that rights to the SABC. In fact, part of the sponsorship fee could include that we get that rights at no cost then. Then we're not competing with paid TV then. We've got to find models that works for both parties.
Right. Where is the negotiations at with regards to the Cricket World Cup rights? With regards to the SABC?
We started negotiating with cricket, athletics, as well as the rugby. Just more than 2 years ago. 14 months ago, we deadlocked. We went to Competitions Commission. We're still waiting that to be heard. And then we started discussions with them again in December, and then in earnest January to say, please, can we reach an agreement on these three? I think we all know what happened around the rugby. The cricket, it's still up in the air. We just cannot afford the cost, what they are putting on the table, with the restrictive conditions. That conditions doesn't come with the rights owner. That's additional stuff that they are putting on that seriously impacts our ability to monetize that. So under a month, we still don't know whether we have rights for Cricket World Cup as yet. We still don't.
Yeah. How does it affect operations when it comes right down to the wire?
Hugely. So, and that's the game that SuperSport plays, because they know that if we do get the rights, our schedules are determined 3 months in advance, and they're locked. Okay, and then there's obviously marginal fluctuation. In this case, our schedules are locked for 3 months, and it doesn't include cricket on there. We've got to now redo that schedule. Obviously, there's some commercial activities attached to that. Renegotiate those terms because they are attached maybe to a specific property that will be displaced. It's very disruptive in our world, and our ability to sell. The market buys upfront, 3 months upfront. And when it comes to sports, maybe even a year upfront. They know what, and you know how companies would work. You have a budget, you plan for that. You don't come on the spur of the moment and say, oh, we're doing the cricket next month, do you have money? They've already allocated that budget.
Collin, does the white paper talk to these practical things that Ian is mentioning? Does it have any solutions in there that can help with regards to this?
If you read the statement of Minister Koto, I think he was very specific to say this is one of the issues that we need to resolve and sit around the table with. But in terms of the white paper and how we looked at it, is that indeed most of these rights are bought years in advance. And you'll want, that's why we are emphasizing on ICASA focusing on dispute resolution mechanism, because we will want everyone to finalize this 7 months, 6 months in advance, because I think when we're doing our analysis, we recognize that broadcasters log those advertising in 6 months' time. So before even they reach that 3 months, the dispute resolution mechanism will allow the committee in ICASA that deals with dispute to address the matter, rather than even going to the Competition Commission. Because what the competition commissions across the globe have done, if you check let's talk about the PSL. If you check how they have improved access, is that you have rights for Wednesday, for Friday, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, Sunday afternoon, and Monday evening. And those will not go to one broadcaster. So the Competition Commission always comes in when maybe there is prohibitive practice where the SABC is deliberately locked from getting the rights for competitive purposes. But you also, we have that principle of anti-hoarding, where you say even if you buy the rights, you cannot hoard them so that your competitors are not able to get them all on. So we have thought about this.
And also a time period, isn't it?
The time period is very critical because we cannot expect the SABC to buy them at the 11th hour. And what happens if they spend about 10 million, it means it's gone. It cannot be replaced. And the only way that they can replace it is to give them 6 months to 3 months so that they're able to plan for advertising, as you say.
Okay, lots more to discuss. I need to take a quick break. Just to remind viewers as well that we did invite MultiChoice, SuperSport, Sports Department, ICASA. None of them were available for comment. Today we'll endeavor to try get you answers, but we are, pursuing this in order to get some sort of solutions here so you have a better understanding when it comes so close down to the wire, when the Cricket World Cup rights are coming up, when it hits the headlines. You have an understanding and a background context as to why this is happening. Quick break, more next. We talk about sporting rights. If you didn't care about it before, you now do, isn't it? Because the hype around the Rugby World Cup, the Springboks now on a winning streak, you want to watch the games. Let's talk about that in terms of the process of getting you those games, those matches as well. My guest today in studio, in Plaatjes, SABC COO, as well as Collin Mashile, Chief Director Broadcasting Policy at the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. We also have our digital audience here as well. They're going to be throwing in some questions. Collin, I just wanted to check with you with regards to your understanding, and maybe Ian, you can jump in here as well. The accessibility of the various sporting codes, to what extent does that influence the growth of that sport?
Look, there's a very serious correlation. Look at what happened when SPA and Telkom started sponsoring and making investment into netball. Netball was not on the list originally. It has made it to the list because it became popular. So there are certain sports that are not on the list now, but as the environment changes, you put them on the list. So, and I think that's where I think government is coming from, to say there are certain events that are of very significant importance to South Africans, and the only way that we can get value like we're getting now in terms of social cohesion and others is to ensure that they are being broadcast. So that's why even in the Broadcasting Act, and now we are talking about developmental sport, to say when you start broadcasting such, then the popularity increases and they start going into that list as those that are very important. So there's a very serious correlation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me personally because, I mean, I became a fan of rugby after '95 World Cup, after watching it, after hearing PJ Power's song, You would agree that the more you watch it, the more the interest grows.
It's not just about the interest. And let me give you physical numbers. You look at netball, and Netball South Africa has got exclusive rights given it to MultiChoice. They use 16.1 of the ECA Act to justify that as well. If you look at the World Cup that was shown recently, the previous record for global viewership was just about 4.5 million, roundabout there. MultiChoice showed all 60 games and they had just over 4 million. The SABC only had 20%, 12 games. 12 million audiences watch that. That's the power that sport has for social cohesion and moral regeneration of the country. And we cannot deprive the people from that.
No doubt it has a huge element in terms of nation building. Let's take it to our digital audience. Liz, comments, senior reporter at the Mail and Guardian, your comment or question?
Good evening, Blaine. Thank you for the opportunity. I was made aware of this issue when the Restaurants Association issued a statement saying that they felt that restaurants across the country, which are still on their knees recovering from COVID, have been held ransom by MultiChoice, which increased its subscription fees by up to 50% for those commercial owners. So they got in a letter a couple of days before the 1st of September, and they were told that, or a week before, that the rates were going up. I spoke to one restaurateur who filed a complaint with the Competition Commission saying that his fees went up from 800 Rand per month to 1,200. He had to switch packages to ensure that he could still get all the coverage of the rugby with the way they had readjusted their packages under the new fee structure. So the Competition Commission is sitting with his complaints, and they have actually called for people to come forward with evidence to show whether or not this is a monopoly over the rights, because that was the gist of the complaint.
Liz, thank you very much indeed for that insight. Asipile, let's get your take. Magatka.
Thank you for the opportunity. Rod, to look at only concern when sporting events really enough, but concern there's no hack, whatnot. And
Asipile, I think we're having a bit of an, is it just me, Control? Confirm if we're having a bit of an issue with Asipile. We'll try to come back to you. Let's try to fix up your line. Hopefully we can. I'm not sure if it is due to any electricity issues. I'm not sure. We'll come back to you, Magaka. Morgan, let's hear from you.
Yes. Evening to everyone in the studio and all the guests. I just wanted to ask something. I watch a lot of NBA, football, and baseball. And what they have in USA is something called PPV, pay-per-view, whereby instead of paying for the whole tournament or there's certain games that people just want to watch. I mean, look at La Liga. We just want to watch Barcelona and Real Madrid. Nobody really wants to watch all the other games. So do we have something like that in the SA? And then another thing that I want to ask, I mean, yesterday I was busy scrolling on TikTok, and there's a whole lot of guys that are live streaming games. You know what I mean? And there are also apps whereby you can download and watch the games and, bypass multi-choice and, stuff. Are you guys aware of those things? Because when things are expensive, obviously the black market is also going to rise and people are going to take opportunity. So I don't know. That's just my thing for now.
Ian, if you want to pick it up, maybe if...
Look, it's a great concept, and pay as you go is something that we're going to be playing in as well, but I don't think we're going to be doing it for sport, because our whole argument is sport for all. Okay, so it's free to air. You're not going to be paying for it. So you can consume it as you want to at no cost. Right. So that challenge goes away. But the concept of as pay as you go, definitely.
What about the online space as well? And given the current example of the rights for the rugby games, 16 matches if I'm not mistaken, are we able, what sort of restrictions are there in terms of the online space?
Okay, so there are no restrictions on the online space. Okay. The restrictions is on our sport channel. Our sport channel is broadcasted on OVHD, and that's the restriction. So they block that. So 3.2 million households cannot watch the rugby game because if you have an OVHD. The concept that Morgan is raising is definitely within the sport, not the whole game, but there's certain highlighted moments that you can, and that's where the pay-as-you-go would come in for that, on the online side.
Yes, I think Morgan asked very important questions. The second one, I will not encourage him to go to illegal streamers. You see, when they buy the rights, it's an investment, and the global challenge now is around piracy. And as he was talking, as my colleague was talking about pubs, in the UK you saw that they have sentenced people to jail for this piracy, and it's killing the investment that the broadcasters are making into content. It's not only sport, also content. But in terms of the first one, how the rights are sold is that you'll sell them to free to air, you'll sell them to subscription, and you'll sell them to mobile or the streaming services. So the American model is the one that has the pay-per-view, where they can sell them in that fashion.
Right.
But it's because they have a broadcasting act that makes what Jeanette was talking about, the billions that NBC. They are free to air, where everyone is able to watch sports. It's very strong. It has access to those rights. So the pay-per-view is usually when it's done by, for example, boxing, where it's not owned by associations, but by holders of those rights. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's take it back to a digital audience. And Paul, let's hear from you.
Good evening to the gentlemen in the studio and good evening to the panel. And I think for me, one of the important things is the appreciation that sports needs the funding that the broadcasting rights go, because globally, all the sports, if you look at all the sporting codes around the world, they require the funding. But the likes of ICASA have got to start playing an active role that is in the best interest of the public at large, because you can have somebody who has the rights and appears to seem to be interested in selling. As Ian said, if you're going to be selling on the rights, like now the rugby rights, for you to be able to recoup that investment that you've made, you need to go convince advertisers, you need to go and convince corporate. Nobody wakes up and says, I've got a 2 million rand worth of sponsoring that comes in my hand. You've got to go through your internal processes to be able to get that. So ICASA on their side have got to play an important part. And one of the laws that I would say proposes to be able to say, if you are not a free-to-broadcast company, you shouldn't be able to bid for those rights, because you are now blocking and you are now anti-competitive in your behavior. You are now making sure that SABC, as the one that can be able to air those, is unable to go and recoup the investment that they've made by selling it to corporate to be able to advertise, because you're trying to push numbers. But you seem to have been interested in the conversation while you were not actually there. You are anti-competitive in your behavior.
Yeah, important point, Paul. Just to sensitize the viewers, Ian and Collin as well. As I said, the news comes first on the SABC. We are waiting a quick interview with President Cyril Ramaphosa over in New York. Our correspondent Shaun Bryce-Peace, he's there, he's standing by there. You'll see him on your screen popping up shortly. When he does have the president, we will take him live, but we will endeavor to, well, as soon as that happens, we'll cross to Shaun. But let's carry on with our conversation. Ian, with regards to this list of national interest sporting codes, do you think it's a political decision or a regulatory one?
Well, that's the same thing. Okay, so the political body will obviously determine the regulations. So yes, I do believe that they need to control that. And it's not an exclusive thing, and it's not to cut out certain things. It's for both pay TV as well as free-to-air TV to be able to take the rights and exploit it so that nobody is disadvantaged out there.
You're right. I asked the question in terms of the differentiation because currently you'll have ICASA as an independent body who will decide. So you think it should be handed to government? Government needs to decide.
Well, I'm not saying government needs to decide. I'm saying government needs to obviously take the lead in terms of the acts, the appropriate acts, and the founding legislation and regulation should actually be there to build up sport, not to limit it.
Right. The I word might come up, Collin, interference. You might hear that pushback. What's your response to that in terms of government getting involved in this way?
Yes, as I indicated to you, indeed the submissions that were made by MultiChoice was that they are fine with the current situation in terms of the white paper. It's a generally accepted norm across the globe. The Minister of Sports in the UK decides the list. What you see in terms of Sky and others is decided at the political level. But as we are engaged in public engagement, this is where, remember what people are complaining about, to say we need to settle this up front. So what we are saying is that we want to release the regulatory consent that he has to say, ICASA deal with this dispute resolution mechanism so that the free-to-air are not disadvantaged. And the only way to do that is when you focus on dispute resolution mechanisms that will allow this rights to be sold probably 20 weeks before, so that they start budgeting for advertisement and recoup the money, because as they say, these rights are very prohibitive, very expensive, and only subscription and online services can afford them. But the suspicion that you have about us, it's unfounded. I don't think the government is intervening because it wants to make like unnecessary political decision. As you saw, what the ministers did, they said we want to accrue certain benefit to the South Africans, and the 76-0 today is a testimony to that. Everyone saw it, and that's what we want. This sport not to be only on subscribers, but free to air where all South Africans are.
Yeah. It's about leveling the playing fields. It's not interference.
Yeah. Talk to us about the interest, Ian, so far. 2 games that we've shown of the Springboks. What sort of numbers are you getting?
Huge. If you look at just the first game, obviously we'll get the stats of this one today a bit later, was over 2 million. You compare that to multi-choice, I think they added something like 800,000. Add the 3.2 million households that we are leaving out of the equation, and you can see the numbers then. So it's huge. And I must say, the companies are certainly coming to the party, and they're realizing the value for their own brand, and obviously for their sponsors as well.
Ian, sorry, I have to stop you there to pause. As I said, we are on, let's take Sherwin Bryce-Pease live for us in New York. He's with President Cyril Ramaphosa. Sherwin, welcome to It's Topical. Talk to us, the build-up to UNGA. What's on the agenda?
Blaine, there's a lot on the agenda. A number of big SUVs have just pulled up. We expect the president to be arriving any moment now. We might have just sort of jumped the gun yet because I haven't seen anybody exit these cars yet. But as you said, the president here for a packed agenda, including the SDG summit tomorrow. Of course, he will meet with business leaders in the United States, hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on Monday night. And then on a Tuesday, he will deliver the country statement in the UN General Assembly. And what a statement to look forward to, given the tensions we have seen between countries like the United States and South Africa, coming out of the BRICS summit, the multipolarity that we are seeing emerging, the centers of power that we are beginning to see emerge around the world, and what that says to the development agenda that is very much a focus at these United Nations General Assembly week, but certainly the SDG summit speaking to that issue, the climate ambition summit speaking to the development agenda, things like financing for development, which is a big sticking point for developing countries in terms of the requisite needs that will get us to things like implementing a just transition, particularly in the energy sector. Let me just have a look and see here. I still do not see the president, but as you correctly point out, a very, very busy week here. A number of ministers in town, including the Environment Minister. We just saw Barbara Creasy walk in. Minister of International Relations, Naledi Pandor. The Minister of Health is here. There is a pandemic preparedness high-level meeting where member states will agree to a political declaration. Remember, there were a lot of gaps in the aftermath that one observed in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, things like vaccine nationalism, the lack of innovation and technology, particularly when it came to the development of therapeutics and vaccines. The big negotiations at the World Trade Organization, led by South Africa and India, really did demonstrate some of the gaps that developing countries like South Africa must put in place in terms of when the next pandemic will happen. And then in terms of things like the Climate Ambition Summit, which will be on Wednesday, very much concern about the lack of financing that is required for developing countries to implement this very broad agenda. You'll hear Gwede Mantashe say things that might irritate developed nations in terms of how quickly they expect South Africa to transition away from fossil fuels to renewables. That's a big debate. You know, the SG has called for developed countries to drop all use of fossil fuels by 2040, developing countries by 2050. But if you look at issues like energy poverty in the context of South Africa, one then gets a sense that maybe this timeline is a bit too rapid for countries like South Africa. So a lot certainly to talk about here, and hopefully we'll be able to engage with the president as and when we see him, Blaine.
Sherwin, we're going to keep you up. As soon as you have access to the president, we will come back straight to you. Stand by. It's very important indeed. The United Nations General Assembly, you have a number of world leaders, as Sherwin says, outlining in terms of what's on the agenda there. President Cyril Ramaphosa, what would his message be in the back of the BRICS summit as well? Certain resolutions there to expand the BRICS as well. How would that play? How is the geopolitics play out in Unga? Sherwin will tell us in a short while. Stand by. We'll take you there to New York live. Sorry, gentlemen, to cut you off. As you know, news coming first here. Just maybe as we conclude our conversations in terms of how do we get to a point, Ian, where we get a fair bidding process? As you say, you're not too happy with regards to that, isn't it? What's your solutions?
Okay, so the regulations is going to take care of that. As I say, we can't wait for that to happen. Between now and then, we need the public to stand up, basically, and saying, look, we're getting behind you. We have a right to see these sports. We need the sponsors of these sports. And I must say, I've had many calls from companies and saying, we didn't actually understand that this was the situation, what MultiChoice was doing. How can we assist you? And so we're kind of confident that we'll be able to do the cricket as well, based on the calls that we are getting, and we're working through those numbers now. So it's the public and business that needs to stand up and saying, look, until that happens, this is how it's going to work. We will sponsor you as the rights owner, whichever sport coding that is, but you will pass that rights on to the SABC. If you don't, then we are not going to sponsor you. Or we come to the SABC and say, whatever that price tag is that MultiChoice is putting on the table, we will cover that as well as part of our sponsorship.
Right. Just remind the viewers when the Competition Commission will hear your case.
So the matter was postponed. It was supposed to be in this year. It's postponed to next year, so we have no idea when that is going to. There's obviously another matter with ICASA, and that's the must carry, because that makes sure that our sport channel gets put onto DSTV as well. We lodged that with ICASA in November last year. We still haven't heard anything about that as well.
Collin, as an extension of these sporting codes of national interest, what about other issues such as of national importance, such as a presidential address or state funerals, for instance? Is that part of the white paper?
Indeed, in terms of that chapter, you have that national sporting events and other events of importance, where it's about news clips or what you saw yesterday, the funeral of Dr. Mangosuthu Buthelezi, or the inauguration. So I think those are the issues that are within to say how do you, within the white paper, to say how do you deal with those in terms of, do you give them full rights or do you force the SABC to cover them? But the thinking is that if ever there are events that are of national, like health matters, the intention is to ensure that the Department of Health comes to the party. For example, all the cultural days, and those that have to do with social cohesion, the Department of Arts and Culture will have to come in because to assist the SABC in terms of the rights. But it is part of that part that deals with events of national importance, yes.
Okay, let's try our digital audience, those that we couldn't try. Asipile, let's try you one more time there. Let's get your comment.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope I am audible now.
Much better. Go ahead.
Thank you. So with regards to issue, I think it's a very interesting one. One said when this sporting event, no high corruption, more not accessibility.
Oh, that's not good. It's not your day, but I will make this commitment to you. We will bring you in next week, as we will try. We will endeavour to try. Thank you so much. Let's try maybe Mpho. Let's hear from you, Mpho.
I think one of the things that we've got to be able to engage ICASA on is to be able to have timelines. Because from an SABC perspective, for you to be able to go to corporate and make these rights accessible to everybody, you need to be able to say, you need to be able to have the timeline to say 6 months' time in advance before this happens. All those rights have been sorted out and all those rights have been agreed upon. Because to go to a point whereby you are 2 weeks before the tournament, the marketing department, the advertising department have not sat and had anybody to talk to unless corporate comes, because the corporates that come, they've also got their own internal governance that run them on their side. So even the sporting rights, for example, your Cricket South Africa, your SAFA, your Rugby Union, they need to be able to say, our rights need to be seen by everybody. They've got to start not just looking on the financial side, but also looking at mass participation. Because when you see a Sia at the World Cup, when you see a Temba Bavuma at the World Cup, you want to be able to say, kids in the township, everybody has access to them, and they've got the aspiration factor which they can be able to look at. So ICASA have got to be able to say, here are the timelines, and be able to say they are looking out for South Africans and not just the corporate side of things.
Maximizing accessibility. Lise, let's hear from you. Where do you see the solutions? If you can unmute, Lise. There we go.
Apologies. I do agree with Paul that timelines are important. This Rugby World Cup, we had an 11th hour decision where the likes of SAB and Hollywood, and there was one other sponsor that had come in and helped SABC to pay for the right at the 11th hour. That's, a lot of restaurants were not happy with that, and businesses, because they want to show the World Cup. It contributes to social cohesion, people getting together in the communities. But if it's an elite group only that has access, paying high subscription fees, it's not going to work. We need competition.
Yep. Lincoln?
Yes, I think also the quota system may work because here we're tying somebody's hands behind, and we let another one loose, and then we say compete. It's very much uneven. So I think government should come in. It's not government interference. It's leveling the playing field. And a South African package needs to be sought in respect of multi-choice and SABC just forming a peg to confront the world. So it looks like a multi-choice has got more advantage and is sufficiently fed, and now it can't give away that leverage. So government has to come in and try and regulate this so that we on the grassroots have access. We, the sports fanatics, have got access to all those sporting codes. So at the moment, it looks like we're living in the periphery of South Africa where there's no hype, and that we have no boys that are out there competing in the World Cup. Because it's dead quiet. But if SABC was actively involved there, we would be having streets lining up every day. So I think we have to consider the government coming in and like Mpo said, timelines. Make an advantage to be the competition to be a little bit fairer.
I guess the appropriate thing to say is watch the space. Thank you very much indeed to my digital audience. Ian, Colin, thank you as well. Time is never on our side. Also dealing with other elements, but appreciate your patience with us. Appreciate it. Thank you. All right, before we go, here's my take. An agreement has been reached, but are you in agreement that it's necessary for such deals to go right down to the wire, keeping the nation on tenterhooks? Surely that feeling should be reserved for the field of play. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. Nelson Mandela said that. But that can only happen if you are allowed to experience it one way or another, either playing it or watching it, right? When a nation's needs are being considered, the need for drama, skillful play, outsmarting the opponent shouldn't be in the broadcasting rights negotiation boardrooms. It should be on the field of play. Doing what's best for the country should always win. Let sport unite us, not divide us. And that's my take. If you missed anything, be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube. Sports Live is up next. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. The news continues now, actually. Showing Brightspeeds is live for us in New York. He's keeping a close eye on President Cyril Ramaphosa. He's joining a number of world leaders in New York this week for the annual high-level segments for the United Nations General Assembly. And there's a number of elements at play here. Who will be attending? What will be said? It's not just the talk shop. It's about what happens also in the peripheries, the bilaterals between various leaders. What will be discussed then? What about Ukraine? Ukrainian's president, will he be there? Will he speak? Will he be confronted or be in the same vicinity as his Russian counterparts? How would that play out? Also, factor in what happened at BRICS. Talk about this world order. Is it a new world order? You saw what happened at G77 as well in Cuba. Very technological, heavy talks there as well. That was the theme. How would that translate now in terms of going into the United Nations? Sean Bryce Peace is going to get a first-hand take from the president of South Africa. Busy weekend for him. He had the funeral yesterday of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, then jetted off to the United States. So we'll hear from Sean in a short while. When that happens, no doubt the SABC will try to bring that to you live. All right, that's a wrap from It's Topical. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Do stay tuned to SABC News. Until next week, goodbye.